Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Microsoft Fabric UK User Group. I'm your host, Leon Gordon, and I'm here with my co-host, Pragati Jain.
Hey everyone, how's everyone doing? Leon, what's up?
Well, I think we've coordinated fairly well today in terms of the red
Oh yeah,
festive
colors.
jumpers.
Looks like that.
I wish we would have sent a memo out before this, but it looks like it's come together quite well. So I'm good, thank you, Pragati. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, just logged off from work on time today, so that's a good thing. So yeah, pretty good, and yeah, definitely look forward to our today's session and ready to catch up with our today's guest as well.
Absolutely. And I'm very excited as well, Pragati, for today's session. One of the biggest topics in Power BI and outside of Power BI as well is DAX. Easy for some who are very, very limited in their number, and exponentially difficult for others as well. So today's session, and myself included as well, is going to make that a lot easier for all of the masses and Pragati for us as well. So let's go ahead and introduce Jay. Jay, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And I didn't get the memo, as you can see, about the color.
But I think you totally rock with what you're wearing right now, Jay.
Okay. But I want to blend in anyway. Just joking. Thanks for having me. It's always awesome to talk to you all.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And today's topic is going to be absolutely amazing as well in terms of visual calculations and how you're going to make DAX easier. We're waiting with bated breath, Jay, us and the masses.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I'm going to do my best to explain it. And the proof will be, of course, in the pudding. Proof will be in the pudding when you guys get access to it. And then, I'll probably say that over and over again, but try it and give us feedback. And, we'll see if it actually is as good as we think it is.
Excellent. No, thank you very much, Jay. Just before we do get started, let me go ahead and make some housekeeping rules for everyone joining us. Please do let us know where in the world you're joining us from. We want this to be a very interactive session, so please do feel free to ask questions throughout. When you do, if you can, please prefix them with a Q. It makes it a lot easier for us to moderate. With that being said, Jay, we'll go ahead and hand over to you for your session.
Cool.
Well, Leon, did we forget to introduce Jay? Sorry.
Well, so what I've taken to here now after so many mispronunciations of names and trying to pronounce, what I've learned is it's best for me to just welcome the speaker and then let them do their introduction as part of their presentation. Unless Pragati, you're going to take this one on for us.
No, I just call him Jay. I'm not pronouncing his name.
Excellent. So from
I think everyone knows Jay. He doesn't need an introduction, I guess. And Jay, I just thought we both too much talk to Jay, so it feels like he's just part of us, so we really don't need to introduce him.
Aww.
So yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate that. And one of my life goals was to arrive in some state where I didn't need any further introduction. So I'm not sure if that's now or if that's good or bad. You can be, famous or infamous. I'll leave that up to you all to decide.
No, you're definitely famous, Jay. People know you, so I guess you don't need an introduction.
Cool. Well, I mean, then we can just get started, I think.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jay. Enjoy your session.
Yeah. Well, so today I want to talk about what we've been doing, working on making DAX easier. So we'll have a lot of content here, but please feel free to add your comments in the chat as well. We'll monitor them and field them as many as we can and make sure we get your questions answered. So I'll do a very quick introduction of myself in case you don't know me, although, apparently people know me by now. But I'm a senior product manager on the Power BI team. I focus mostly on the programming language that everybody loves to hate, which is called DAX. My parents gave me the name Jeroen. That's a Dutch name. Don't worry about it. I go by Jay. So feel free to just call me that. And you can find me on social here, like on many of the social channels. And as well, here's my email address in case you ever need it. So yeah, really, the thing that we started thinking about and the thing that we noticed over the years is that the feedback we've been consistently getting is DAX is perceived as very hard. In fact, for the last, I don't know, 6 years, I think, DAX has been in the top 3 of complaints about Power BI. Top 3 for the reasons to not adopt Power BI, full stop, like not move to Power BI from a competitor product, for example, or not onboard onto Power BI full stop, or to halt deployment of Power BI in an organization. And DAX has been in the top 3 for 6 years there now, saying DAX is so hard. Because of that, we're not onboarding onto Power BI, we're not migrating to Power BI, or we're stopping deployments, any further deployments for Power BI in our organization. And that's a real problem. And it's interesting that we got that far with our product to our position that we have in the market, with our core programming language in which you do all the calculations being perceived as so hard. If that's really true, that's really a testament to the quality of the rest of the product that we got this far. So that started us thinking about 3 years ago, like, what can we do, right? What can we do to make DAX easier? Not trying to get rid of DAX or whatever, just trying to make it easier. So for that, to understand that, we needed to analyze the problem a little bit. And we came to the conclusion that the reality is that how people write DAX today, how most of us write DAX today, is like this. And this has quickly become a meme after I put it together. It's basically you find something in some source, our community website, a blog, maybe from an MVP or non-MVP or a community member, maybe something on social channels, maybe one of these books. Like you probably recognize this one, right? That book, or I have one over here as well. This guy, this book, a proud Dutch product from 2 Dutch MVPs. You get one of these books, you go to the training, you do all of that, and you find something that looks like the solution to your problem, you paste it into your desktop or your web environment for Power BI, for DAX, and you just cross your fingers, and maybe if you're so inclined, you kind of talk to some whatever higher power or so, totally optional. And then you basically hope for the best, right? And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you are left struggling to understand why, and struggling to edit the DAX, because the reason you copy pasted is probably because the DAX is so complicated that you weren't able to write it yourself. So even if it's there, you know, you might not even be able to make the changes you need to make sure that it can work, right, in all your situations. You might not even be able to validate that it actually works in all your situations. And so even if you found something that actually works, you're not entirely sure if it works in all situations that you have. So that's another problem right there. So to just give you an example of such a problem, let's think about something like a running total or a running sum. That's not hard, right? It's very simple stuff. Anybody with basic understanding of math can do a running sum. If you know Excel, you can do that very easily in Excel. It's not like you need to study for like years and years and years and understand math before you can do a running sum. It's not a risk analysis of a financial institution. It's a very basic thing. But if you started looking at doing a running total or running sum in Power BI, you'll very quickly stumble upon this source, which quotes 21 steps to doing a running total in Power BI. 21. Let that sink in. The leading BI tool in the world, 21 steps to doing something as simple as a running sum or running total. That's 20 steps too many. And this is really where we started thinking, okay, what can we now do? How can we reimagine working with DAX in Power BI to make it better? So our analysis was, let's face it, DAX is hard. And to be exact, it's not DAX that is hard. The language in itself is relatively simple to understand. It's not a hard programming language. The language that is not the problem, really. The problem is how it's being executed. And with that, I mean the context in which it's being executed. So when you define a DAX measure, for example, that's defined in the data model. And in the data model, you have context coming in from all your tables. And it's really hard to understand for any given situation how this measure, in what context this measure is being executed. So why it generated the number it did, right? It paints 42 onto your screen, but how did it come to 42? What were the ingredients that went into this DAX expression, and then in which context was it calculated that could potentially change that result to end up with a 42? We don't do a good job in the product to explain that to you. You just have to look at the model view and go like, well, I see this relationship coming in from that table, that relationship from that table, that relationship from over here, and all of that impacts it. But it's really hard to reproduce, and also really hard to understand all the situations that measure might be used in. So very quickly you find yourself doing all kinds of mental gymnastics to understand and explain why this number is the number it is. And you have to be very defensive almost in your DAX writing to make sure it works in all situations for all of your customers. So, and then on top of that, typical business type calculations are hard to do. I already talked about running sum. There's a concept called quick measures that we have that allows you to generate DAX expressions that are very common. However, the DAX it generates is still very complicated and very, very hard to comprehend and edit. There is a running sum thing in there that allows you to generate that DAX, but still it generates a multi-line DAX statement that is not easy to understand, let alone edit if you're just getting started on the DAX journey. So we really started thinking, okay, what if we could allow you to do something completely different? What if we allowed you to turn this whole thing upside down? And with that, what I mean is today, if you think about Power BI as a pipeline, right? There's multiple steps in the pipeline. We start with the data from the source, and all the way at the end is data in a visual. Okay, so data's in the source. You do some data transformations in Power Query or whatever, however you do that. And then you enter the data model where you build the various tables and you have the relationships between the tables. Now, right there in the data model, all the way at the beginning of the pipeline, that's where you define measures. That's where the complexity of filter context, the model, the complexity of measures today lives. Okay, that's where you have to deal with all of this. The unaggregated data is there, the relationships are there. You have to do this mental gymnastics. Then we continue, we do aggregations, we calculate the filter context, and we start painting visuals onto your screen. And then that's the final output, one or more visuals onto your screen, right? Now, what if, instead of only allowing you to put a DAX calculation in here at the beginning, we also gave you an option to do it over here, right before the last step, right before we painted that visual onto your screen? And then what if, when we did that, we left everything that makes DAX hard over here out? Because filter context is something you have to worry about here. Over here, you don't, because it has already been applied. We are right at the stage where we painted the visual onto your screen. What if then on top of that, we allowed you to easily write and read the DAX statements, so the DAX you actually have to use are easier? And then what if on top of that, we would even allow you to not have to rely on typing, but just instead do point and click. So if you don't want to type all that much, you can use a mouse pointer and simple drag and drop kind of expressions like in Excel, gestures like that to make your expression and make your calculation happen. And that all is essentially what visual calculations are. We call that visual calculations or visual calcs for short. And it's basically DAX calculations, not defined in the model, but on the visual. It is not a new language. It's still DAX. The thing we decided to do is say, we're giving you a way to allow you to write DAX calculations in the latest stage, as far upstream as we can in the, far downstream as we can in the pipeline. So as late in the pipeline as we can, just before the pixels are painted onto your screen that makes the bar chart or the line graph. Now, and then when you do that, you can refer to any field that's on the visual, including other visual calcs. This means you cannot refer back to the model. You can only refer to what's on the visual. So we give you a sandbox and you're inside this little sandbox. That might sound weird, but think about it. If we allowed you to, from that sandbox, reach back into the model, you would have to worry about filter context again. And that's really what we left behind. That is now out of the door. That's outside of the house. You don't have to worry about it. You're now inside this house, which is a very clear defined space. So these visual calcs are executed in scope of the visual, not in the model. And then they come with little tricks. they can refer to a visual structure because suddenly we now have a DAX construct that is inside of a visual that understands what kind of visual it's on and can play with that. I'll show you that in the demo. And you don't have to worry about the complexity of DAX in the filter context in the model. And on top of that, performance of visual calcs is going to be way better than measures. Why? It's because visual calcs operate on the aggregated level of data after the aggregation has happened. Any DAX measure that you do today is working on unaggregated data. But think about it. If you wanted to aggregate 12 months in a year, you wanted to do a running sum in 12 months in a year, you don't need the individual sales records. What you need to do is aggregate them, fine, and then some maximum of 12 numbers to calculate the number of sales per month in years, right? So with that, because we have the aggregated data for the visual anyway, we just allow you to do the running sum over there. Wouldn't that be way easier? So, and the performance of that we've seen is a 300 to 500% increase. So even if you're not interested in just using visual calcs for the fact that they're easier and more simple to write and maintain and understand, just for the performance benefit, you should be interested. So then you might sit here and go like, well, wait, what are you guys doing? Well, we're not taking away anything from you. Let me be very clear. We have calculated columns, we have measures, and now we're introducing a third tool into a toolbox. We call that visual calculations. And I like to think about that as the best of both worlds from calculated columns and measures. That is what visual calculations are. So they are defined on the visual. You use the context of the visual. They're computed at query execution, so they don't bloat your model like calculated columns. And then they have nifty tricks that allow you to refer to the visual structure, which I'll show you in just a sec. So to wrap this one up, it's basically WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. We will provide point and click eventually. It's not there yet today with what I'm going to show you. But if you didn't want to type, you can use just a mouse. You use just visible context, so you literally see what you're working with. We introduce tricks with visual structures. We introduce new functions that allow you to do complicated things or almost impossible things very easily. So the mental model I want you to have before I go into the demo, and I see some questions coming in, but all those questions are going to be answered in the demo. So I'm just going to go forward with that. The mental model that you need to have for this is that any visual in Power BI can be represented as a matrix. And in fact, that's not something that's brand new. If you have been paying attention to the Explore mode that we released in public preview just now last month, I believe, you've seen this paradigm already where we have a matrix and a visual and they are tied together. The same data is shown in the visual as in the matrix. And that's what we're doing here. We're basically saying it doesn't matter if it's a bar chart, a line graph, a map, a scatter plot, whatever. Any of those can always be represented as a matrix. So essentially what we're building, we're showing you a UI where you see the visual on which you're working, and then what we call the visual matrix on the bottom that shows the data that's in the visual. So if you direct your attention to the mockup over here, you see there's 3 columns, 3 years, and there's 2 numerical bars for each year. Sales amount and total product cost. So the only data that I actually need at this point, and the only data that Power BI has at this point to paint this visual onto your screen is 3 rows of data divided in 3 columns. 1 column for year with the names of the years, 1 column for sales amount, and 1 column for total product cost. But then 3 rows. There might be millions of records below this, millions of individual sales records. But that doesn't matter at this point. You're just working with aggregated data. And that's what we really need for the visual, and that's what we're showing you. And then the visual calculation allows you to add columns onto that visual matrix. And that is the formula bar you use in the middle between these 2 views of the data, where you can extend essentially a visual matrix with new calculations. And then you can decide what shows up on the visual by using a trick that I'll show you in just a second. So let's just go to a demo, because then everything about this hopefully becomes clear. Who knows? At least I'm going to try to make it clear. Cool. So let me just plug in. Sorry about that. There we go. That's better. Okay. At least now I have better control over the demo right here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a very simple visual. I'm just going to actually replicate what I had in the mockup over there. So it's total sales amount and total product cost. And I'm just going to take fiscal year. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this into a bar chart like this. Very, very simple. No trickery here, nothing special yet. There's nothing going on. However, if you select this visual, you'll see that a button over here, the new calculation button, lights up, because you can select a visual and then you can define a new calculation onto that visual. And when I click that button, I am now in the UI that I just showed you in the mockup on the slides. We're now in what we call Visual Calcs edit mode. So as you can see the bar chart over here, right? You see the 3 years, you see the sales amount of total product cost. You see exactly the same over here in what we like to call the visual matrix, right? The same data, you can compare them, you'll see it matches up, okay? And then there's also already a placeholder calculation created for me, and then the cursor is inviting me to start typing in the formula bar over here. We'll get to this button in just a sec. And then you can also see that the placeholder for the calculation has already been added to the legend, but of course there's no results because there's no calculation, right? So now I can start defining some stuff. I can do something that I should have done in a measure, but I'll just use it as a simple example. I'll just add something called profit. And I'll say, hey, profit is sales amount minus total product cost. Now, before I press enter, there's a couple things to unpack here. If you ever wrote a measure, you might go like, where's the aggregation? Why are you not aggregating sales amount and total product cost? Well, because I don't need to. These calculations, like calculated columns, are executed row by row. So essentially by default. So they're going down the visual matrix. So for each row of the visual matrix, starting with FY 2018, we're going to take the current sales amount minus the total product cost. If I aggregated this, I would get the total sales amount minus the total product cost, which is not what I wanted. I wanted to calculate the difference in each year. And also, I'm not referring to any table. That's the other thing to notice here, because this might have come from multiple tables. I don't care at this point. It has been aggregated. The filter context has been applied. This is a set that the visual is working on. So the fact that this might have come from multiple tables, in fact, it came from 2 tables, the date column, date table and the fact sales, it doesn't matter at this point. It doesn't matter anymore. You just work with whatever name you're seeing here. So with that, hit enter, and now we have a profit calculation. And yes, this should have been a measure. Course. Just to hammer home the point, if I rename this thing and say this is Pragati's sales amount, of course this will work because profit will just update here and refer to the thing that's on the visual. I will absolutely demo calculating a running total. That's a great question. It is coming. Hold on. It is coming. I love it. Okay, so cool. Let me just do another one. So now we have profit. Okay, yes, this should have been a measure. I agree. Let's do something more intelligent. Let's do something that says, hey, I want to compare each profit. Now that I have the profit, I want to compare the profit for each year versus the year above. So the year before me. So profit for 2020, I want to compare it to 2019. 2019, I want to compare it to 2018. 2018, I don't want to compare it to anything because that's the last year on a data set. How do we do that? So I'm just going to say profit comparison. Okay. So, well, the first ingredient I need is profit, not Pragati's. That's why you can see it's a live demo, because normally if I type PR, it works, but now of course I renamed it. So that's why it's live and not fake. This is not fake. This is in the product. I'm doing this live. So profit minus, and then I need something to refer to the previous profit. So what would be the function I would use for that? To get the previous profit. I wonder if it could just be as simple as previous. Oops, again, live demo. I should not have renamed this Pragati sales amount. Anyway, so you now see an expression that's almost English. Profit minus previous profit, which really explains what it does. It says, take the profit and then subtract the previous profit. Would this work? Well, of course it works because I built it. So now you see the comparison. You see the profit versus same thing. And no, you don't have to use same period last month, because that's already way too complicated. You don't need that here. You just are doing comparison calculations versus what you're seeing right here, previous. We also have a function called next to go the opposite direction. We also have a function called first to take the first one. Very useful if you have index years, if you're in financial institutions. And of course, the reverse, we have a function called last to take the last one. Okay, great. So now I have a profit comparison. Great. I can do some more. Let's do that thing that Ben has been asking for, a running total. So now I can type that. I know the expression by now, but I want to show the FX button as well. The FX button is really here to allow you to insert templates. Think about this as a learning tool, a way to discover this land of DAX and trying to help you a little bit more. By no means there's a need for you to use a template. You can type the expression once you know it, but just to help you discover the templates and the things that are available to you, we built that in. So we have running sum, we have moving average, percent of parent, percent of grand total, average of children, versus previous, versus next, versus first, and versus last. Those last four are behind my talking head, but I just spelled them out for you. So versus previous is what I did just now. Next, first, and last, you can imagine I already talked about it. Average of children, very hard to do. Thank you for moving me, Leon. You're fast. Average of children, it's very hard to do always in Power BI land. We have now easier functions to do that. Same for percent of parent and percent of grand total. And then moving average and running sum are almost impossible to do, right? So any guess as to what the function would be the function for running sum? Anything you think it would be? Maybe running sum? Could it be that easy? Well, here you go. That's the answer. You just do running sum. You fill in the blanks. I want to do a running sum of profit. You hit enter. Now you have a beautiful running sum. You want something more? Let's do a moving average. What would be the function name for moving average? Well, by now you should have known. Moving average. It is just called moving average. Who came up with this? Well, we did. I was involved. It's so simple. This is literally almost like English. You can dream up this expression, walk up to here, start typing, and it will work. Moving average, profit, and then I have to select a window size, which basically means what's the slice I want to get. I have 3 years only, so I'm going to do a window slice of 2. So the moving average for 2019 is 2018 and 2019, and moving average for 2020 is 2019 and 2020. Moving average for 2018 is 2018 alone, right? So that is then the moving average. Great. So now, sorry, Leon, can you move me back? Because I need to go to the other side of the screen now. Sorry for making you do this. So it is. So now I've basically screwed up my visual, right? If you now look at the visual, you see everything that I did on the visual matrix is being shown on the visual, which is not exactly what you wanted, because I actually wanted maybe to show only the running sum and the moving average and maybe the comparison, but not profit and total product cost and sales amount. However, I can't delete them because remember what I said, these things only work with what's on the visual matrix. So if I delete stuff from the visual matrix, this whole thing will break. So I can't delete them. But what I can do is I can hide them. So now if I click this little eye icon that you might recognize from the model view, if I select that, you'll see it doesn't disappear from the visual matrix, but it disappears from the visual. So now I can say, you know what? I want profit diff in the tooltips. I want running sum visible, and I want moving average to be in tooltips as well, right? So now I've redesigned my visual. I'm still seeing the same visual matrix, so it's entirely clear how I got to this answer. But I can now back out and I see a visual that wasn't there before, that contains very powerful calculations that didn't exist before, that before you had to write this in DAX in at least 20 lines each. Now it's simple as one line. So that is the demo, and we can now just take some of the questions. I know some of them have come in, so maybe we can just field some of those that have been coming in while I was talking, and I can answer them right here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay. What a great demo. Let's go ahead and get into some comments and questions. So Russell S mentions that he loves DAX. People say that because they don't build a data model, that is why DAX is hard. And then we have... Agreed. And then we have this question coming in from Juan. Does this mean with this approach, for instance, a running total measure will need to be developed for each visual separately / differently?
So this is a great question, Juan. Thanks for asking this. I will not immediately answer it. I'll be turning my pedantic mode on for a second. This is nothing personal, but I'll just be very pedantic for a second. Please don't call these measures, because they are not. They are not measures. They are calculations. They behave differently from measures, and we should not call them measures. So I'll turn my pedantic mode off, but I just needed to call that out. So a running total calculation will need to be developed for each visual separately, yes, because they live in the visual. They are not in the model, because if we put them back in the model, you have to worry about everything that makes DAX hard again. They are inside of the visual. So yes, you would have to develop them separately for each visual. However, you'll be able to copy them from one visual to another. So for reuse, you can copy a visual calculation onto another visual. What happens if, when you do that, we'll check the ingredients, the things you refer to, right? And if those are not on the visual, we'll add them to the visual, but then in a hidden state. So if you don't have sales amount, in my example, you copy my running sum on profit. You don't have profit probably on the new visual. If you had total product cost, but you didn't have sales amount, then what we would do is we would leave total product cost on that visual, and then we'll add sales amount and profit and the running sum, but we would hide profit and sales amount. So we will show the end result is a working visual calc using running sum, and then whatever ingredient you didn't have on the visual, we bring it over, but we'll hide it to not screw up your visual. Because the alternative would be to not bring over the ingredients, and that would leave you in a broken state because you copied it and then your visual calc stopped working because, well, sales amount is not there, right? It's not there in scope of this little box that you're now working in. So great question. I hope that explains.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jay. Pragati, do you want to go ahead with the next one, please?
Yep. So the next question comes from Ben. So he's asking, how many new functions do you have?
I've got a couple more up my sleeve that I haven't shown you yet. But many you've already seen by now. There's a couple more. I actually have a slide on that. We can go to the slide if we want to just quickly answer that part. I can just call them out right here. This is the list of the functions that we'll have. I already showed you many of those. Previous, I showed that. We have next. I already talked about that. First and last, already talked about. Range is a simpler function of doing a window. So a sliding window or growing window. And then I have some functions that I like to call the hierarchical navigation function. It's kind of a misnomer because it seems to imply you have to use a hierarchy here. It can also just be a natural hierarchy, so it doesn't have to be an explicit hierarchy in the model. That's expand and expand all. Those, for the context of the visual calculation, will add more details. So this is the key to doing an average of children. You can literally say, let's say you have years, quarters, and months, and you want to calculate on the year level the average of the quarters, and on the quarters the average of the months. You can now say expand sales amount, assuming we're talking about sales. I need to do the right way. Average of sales amount, right? Calculate the average of sales amount, expand 1, for example, or expand to month. If you want it on the year level to also show the average of all months, you can just say expand to month for this calculation, do an average of sales amount expanding to month, and that is then the answer to do an average of children. Expand all would force you to the lowest level. Collapse is the reverse. So percent of parent, you do a collapse. You say sales amount collapsing to my parent, which means I get the sales amount from my parent, and then I can, for example, calculate what percentage I represent in the total parent sales. And of course, collapse all would do the same as expand all, but basically remove all details, so give you the grand total on the visual. And then lookup is very similar to X lookup and V lookup and H lookup in Excel, right? It's basically where this and this, like if year equals 2020 and country equals UK, get me that number. I don't care where it is, get me that number. That's what lookup will do for you. And then is that level allows you to inspect what things are, what level I am currently executing the DAX expression. So you could write an if statement to do something with subtotals, for example. So those are the functions, and then two more that we have introduced, running sum and moving average. I already showed you those. Now, before I go any further, before I take more questions, because there's quite a few still, great. These functions that I showed you are only available in Visual Calcs. And that's because they are shortcuts to something that we released already called window functions. And you might have seen those in December last year. Window functions are the stuff that we released in December last year that everybody went like, why are they introducing this? Why are you building this? These are the window functions, right? Offset, index, window, rank, row number, order by, partition by, and match by, the supporting functions here. You might have seen this in December and went like, why are they doing this? Essentially what we were doing, what I was doing, is I was showing you the Lego pieces that I was using to build this on top. So the other functions, previous, next, running sum, moving average, etc., are all just shortcuts to these functions. That means that any visual calculation can be represented as a window function. So you will be able to take a visual calculus expression, convert it into a window function to convert it into a measure or a calculated column. The reverse is not entirely true, right? So stuff you do in the medium level or high level functions, so previous and next and running sum, etc., they are only available in Visual Calcs mode. You cannot use them in measures and in calculated columns. So I just wanted to call that one out. Can we take the next question?
Absolutely. I'll jump in with this question from Juan because it's a question that I was going to ask as well. So this question is, where will the visual calcs be stored? For instance, with Vertipack Analyzer, we currently can have a list of measures in the model. Where will the new visual calcs appear?
That's a great question. They are not in the model. So you will not see them in a Vertipack Analyzer that just talks to the model. They are in the report definition file on the visual. So there's a couple things that you will get. They will light up in the scanner API. So when you have the scanner API from the admin to monitor everything that's happening in your environment, we will extend it to show you the visual calcs as well. You can expect the PBIP file or the report definition file. You'll find them in there. So the external tools like, stuff that allows you to inspect models today, they can expand the scope and also start reading the report definition file to show these to you. They are not in the model, and that's on purpose because, again, if we store them in the model, all this beauty of simplicity that you have, that you don't have to worry about being in the model, comes back to hurt you, right? And that's the only real option we have on the table after 3 years of thought, is taking it out of the model. So these are like report measures, not stored in the model, right? You'll find them where report measures are stored, essentially, in the same files.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. Pragati, do you want to go ahead with? Sorry, go on.
We're also thinking about UIs in the product to make it easier to discover these visual calculations, right? And for example, if you can imagine if you have 20 visuals in a report, it would be great if there's some way for me to see all visual calculations in a report and easily jump back and forth between them, right? And that's something that we're currently considering doing.
Just on that question, so just on that answer, Jay, sorry. So are you planning to bring on some different icons, which we can see in the data pane? Like, for example, for visuals, we have that small calculator icon. Now we have for calculation groups. Is it like something identifier icon you're planning to bring for visual calcs, or?
So they are not in the model, right? So they're not in the data pane. The data pane over here, oh, we're not looking at the screen. Maybe you can bring the screen back up to the, thank you. The data pane over here doesn't list the visual calcs, right? It's not there because this is the representation of your model. So what we're doing is they are instead on the visual. So over here, you'll see them as a little icon, right?
There's an icon, yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is you can imagine some kind of pane that you could open. I'll just take, I don't know, the bookmarks maybe as an example, right? You could imagine a pane that allows you to see all visual calculations.
Visual calcs,
Right, and then click on them, be brought to the visual on which they're on, or even inspect the DAX expression right here. Maybe even make small changes over here, who knows? But yeah, we're still working through what that would be and how that will work. So if you have ideas and suggestions on that, please feel free to give me that feedback.
Thanks, Jay.
Yep, no worries.
Okay, so I'll take this next question from London Business Analytics Group. I think that's Mark Wilcock behind that. So the question from Mark is, with functions like running sum, are there optional arguments to tweak the calculation? Example, leading or lagging values, or are you by design keeping these simple?
So this is a great question. Thank you. So there are optional parameters that I've been hiding from you. Absolutely. However, I instilled a very clear rule when we started architecting this, and I said I will not allow any of these new functions to have more than 4 parameters. That was a very arbitrary number that I picked, but I fought very hard to keep it under 4. So the maximum number they have are 4 parameters, and that's a rule that I set, and so far we haven't broken it. We might bump it up to 5, but we have some flexibility. What I showed you today is just like, there's loads of stuff hidden, and we can go into a little bit more detail when we get all the other questions out of the way. But yes, there is more control than just this. So you will, for example, be able to say previous by default says previous 1. What if I wanted to jump a year? Previous 2. You could absolutely do that. Or next would not take the next year, but next 3 would skip 2 years, for example, in my example, right? First and last, you could say, I want the first, but then not the actual first. I actually want the second. So first minus 1 would put you into the second place. It's kind of weird mathematically, but that's what it did. Last minus 2 would be not the last, but the one just before last, right? So there's stuff like that you can play with. So we'll have more flexibility there. There's way more flexibility that I'm not showing you in the basic demo. But if you wanted all the flexibility, remember, the stuff that I'm showing you can always be represented in the window function. So if there's inflexibility that we gave guardrails here because of this rule to keep it relatively simple. If you're hitting up to those guardrails, remember, running sum is just a shortcut to window. We have a calculate and a sum in window. So if you can do the translation, you can tweak whatever you wanted, because there, all the flexibility is there. What we're doing with running sum is just basically calling window under the covers and filling in the right parameters for order by and partition by and match by for you. But you can always do that yourself. So if you wanted all the flexibility, that's where you go. You use the window function. So that's the trade-off.
Excellent. And Jay, just to follow on to that, more of a comment rather than a question, I guess, but would you then enable the users to grab that DAX that's being executed, or would that only be available by using a third-party external tool?
So great question. Right now, we're not showing you that DAX under the covers. However, we're thinking about a feature that we'd like to call promotion, to say, hey, I want to promote any of those visual calcs and store them as a measure. And if we did that, we would expose you to, of course, because the running sum function is not available in the measure, so we will then show you the DAX, right? Okay. However, the way that's going to work and why we're a little bit hesitant is because if you promote it, we would have to store the current state of the visual into the measure, right? So if you change the visual after and brought the measure back, the measure has no notion of this dynamic, oh, I don't care how my visual is built, right? It will literally just contain, for example, in my example, I had years, right? When I convert it to a measure, it will then start in the measure expression. Will literally say, do a running sum over years. It will be persisted in the expression, where in the visual calcs, it's not. It's just literally do a running sum of sales over whatever happens to be on the axis. If it's years, categories, colors, I don't care. It's more flexible that way. If you persisted this to a measure, the only option we have is to take a snapshot of the current state and say, oh, it was a year, so we'll just do a running sum over year, right? That's then the caveat, because if you bring that thing back, measure it back into your visual, and your visual doesn't show years anymore, but colors, the running sum that I'm doing in a measure will still run over years. Does that?
It does.
Yeah,
Makes complete sense. Excellent. So, yeah, thank you for taking that for us.
No.
Okay. Let's dive into some of the community's questions. So Russell S asks, so is this a natural language interface that is run through a compiler to write DAX in the back end of the engine?
No, this is not natural language. This is literal just DAX. This is no natural language interface. We're not talking Copilot here. This might come in the future, some kind of Copilot integration. But I love this comment, Russell, because the fact that you even thought this was natural language is to me a testament that we're on the right track, because the goal was to make DAX easier and make it feel like almost natural language. And the fact that you thought for a second this is natural language is great, because essentially that's what we wanted. We wanted to make the DAX so easy you go like, I could have just dreamt this up, and that's what it would be. So no, this is not natural language. It's just literal DAX. There's no ambiguity here with like some AI interface in between.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. I know we have some more questions here. I'm conscious of time as well. Would you like to continue demo first and then come back to some of these at the end, or continue from a question perspective?
I wanted to show one more important concept I wanted to introduce to people, and that's what we call the axes. And that's part of the complexity I've been hiding. So let me do that first, and then we can wrap it up with some more questions, okay? So concept called axes, and that is, think of axes as how the calculation traverses the visual matrix. So I showed you the visual matrix at the bottom. I told you I'm adding columns, but these calculations always executed down the rows. And by default, that is our default axis, right? That's why I didn't have to specify it. But I can also choose to go, instead of down the rows or across the rows from top to bottom, I can go left to right on the columns. So if I have an axis that, or a visual that has a columns axis like a matrix, you can then make your running sum not traverse vertically across the rows, but instead horizontally across the columns. And don't worry if this is confusing, we'll show you exactly these icons in the product as well, so you don't have to like remember this. And then we have combinations of the two, which is columns, rows, and rows, columns. And this is where your brain starts melting a little bit, or at least my brain starts melting a little bit. But let me show you what I mean. So first one, here's an example of a matrix where I'm doing first of sales amount on rows. So for each year, look at the matrix, you'll see that years are on the columns and categories are on the rows. So for each year, for each fiscal year, we'll add a column, that is calculation, that takes the first sales amount for the first row in that year. So each calculation for each year, you can see with the color-coded boxes, the dashed line refers to the solid line. You'll see that we take the sales amount for the first row, which happens to be accessories in this case. So that's what this will do. So for each row, retrieve the sales amount from the first row in this column, right? So for 2018, get the sales amount for 2018 for accessories. 2019, get the sales amount for 2019 for accessories, and on, right? Makes sense? We can turn this 90 degrees. Now we're talking about columns. And now we're saying for each column, retrieve the sales amount from the first column. So now we're saying we're not comparing across rows, we're now comparing across columns. So now each dashed line still refers to each solid line, but now for each year, we're taking the sales amount for the first year in that same row. So for accessories, when we get to 2020, the calculation will still refer to the sales amount for 2018. And bikes, clothing, components, same thing. Row by row, comparing across the columns. And then to melt your brain a little bit, we start combining these two things, which arguably is not very useful, but we introduce it anyway, because there is a limited number of scenarios where this is useful. So for example, I'm switching the example a little bit to make it clearer. Previous sales amount on rows, columns. What this would do is for each cell, retrieve the previous sales amount from the row above it, right? Previous sales amount of rows. But then since I also wrote columns, or from the last cell in the previous column. So look at the dashed lines again and look at the color coding. For bikes 2018, that refers to the one, I can point it out actually. I have a pointer here. Whoops, laser pointer. There we go. So this cell is empty because why? There's no row above me. There's also no column to the left of me. So there is no previous sales amount. Makes sense. This cell refers to this. This cell refers to this. This cell refers to this. Now, this cell would have been empty if I just wrote previous on rows because there's no row above it. But since I wrote rows, columns, what this will do is instead, when it didn't find any row above it, it will just take the last value from the previous column, which happens to be the yellow box over here, and so on. So this snakes like this over your visual, okay? And then the final example, turning it another 90 degrees, is doing the same thing, but I like to call this as like the typewriter movement. We go horizontally first and then vertically, right? So now we say for each cell, retrieve the previous sales amount from the column to the left of it or from the last cell of the previous row. So look at the colors again. Red for this refers to the previous year. This green one refers to that year. Makes sense. This blue one, if I just wrote columns, would have been empty because there's no column to the left of me. However, since I wrote columns, rows, I can now get the value from the previous sales amount from the previous year in the previous row, right? And then the yellow one will still refer to that one because it's on the same row. So this is really as complicated as it gets. as it gets. There's more stuff that we're hiding a little bit, but this is essentially the first step. There's another concept called reset that allows you to describe when you want to restart a running sum, for example, or other calculation. For example, if you do a running sum over years, you want the running sum to restart for every year. So you could say running sum, sales amount, reset on year. That basically means if I have multiple years, but also quarters and months, whenever the year changes, start this calculation from 0. So if you wanted to do that, which is normally what you wanted, you could do reset as well. That is, again, has a default of none, so that's why I haven't shown you yet. So in the product, I can now type columns, rows, and rows to make that very explicit. Let me just show that real quick in the product over here. Where's my, oh, I need to go over here. Sorry, other screen. If we go in here, I can now just say, hey, I'm going into calculation edit mode. I'm going to take my running sum, and I'll say, hey, running sum on rows. And you see the little icon that I promised would show up, right? It explains what it does. It goes down the rows, across the rows. This won't change because the value is exactly the same because we were already going down the rows because that's our default. And notice there's no columns here because this visual has no vertical axes. However, if I change it to a visual that has vertical axes, for example, I'm going to say a matrix and add something onto the columns. Now I can say, so this is contextual as well. I can now say, I don't want to do a running sum of profit in rows. I want to do a running sum in profit on columns. So now comparing each, what is in this case, accessory against each other. So now I'm literally changing the value of my running sum. So that's really the complexity that's there. And then on top of that, I could write resets to change this behavior and make sure that it resets when the accessory changes or when the year changes or whatever and restarts. But that's a concept that we haven't really built yet in the product. So I cannot show you that live. So with that, let's go back to some more questions.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you, Jay. Okay, so from a questions perspective, let's take a look. So Santosh says, wow, not a question, but more of a statement, which is obviously great to hear. But he does always also ask a question following that. So the question is, how do we come to the option of creating a visual calculation? So to expand on this a little bit from what my interpretation of this is when do you feel the need, or when should the user feel that they have to go towards a visual calculation as opposed to a measure in the model or quick measure?
That's a great question. I think, I believe, honestly, most people will gravitate towards using visual calculations because it is easier to write, easier to understand, easier to maintain. I mean, Pragati, you've seen this before. I kind of remember your reaction. You were like, I can do this now.
Yeah.
Right? Where before you said, I always struggle with DAX. You basically, like, I'm paraphrasing you, so please correct me, but I kind of read it as, okay, well, this I can understand, right? Yeah,
definitely. So, I mean, when I saw it first time, I was like quite surprised. Oh, this is actually going to simplify a lot of my job because I am actually one of those people who actually struggle with DAX. I write complex DAX only when they're needed. Otherwise, I just know the simplest ones. So when Jay showed this for the very first time at our platform conference, I think, Jay, where you demoed this, right? And
yeah,
I think he remembers my reaction. I was sitting on the front row. I was like, what?
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So really, the simplicity of this has a lot of benefits. Performance, the other thing, even if you don't care about the simplicity, but just the performance, is going to be massive. Like if you do a profit calculation on hundreds of millions of rows, like I did, the first thing it has to do is sum all the individual sales amounts and sum all the individual total product costs. So that's effectively 2 big table scans. Here, since we already are aggregating, you just do the aggregation over here. So the problem with the profit calculation today is we're doing the aggregation here once to calculate the profit. We're doing it again to show you the visual. So it's twice happening. Instead, here with a visual calc, you can just do it on a later stage and only have one aggregation happening and then do the profit calculation on those 3 or 5 or 10 or 12 numbers. And I think we can safely agree that whatever you throw at it, DAX will be able to, Power BI will be able to calculate over, let's say, 100 numbers or so. That is going to be fine. So honestly, I think most people will gravitate towards visual calcs and only use measures when they have to and calculate the columns when they have to. But we'll see. I mean, that's really up to you all, of course, and I believe that, but I'm tainted. I'm preoccupied, of course, having worked on this for 3 years. So maybe I'm totally wrong, but that's my read.
Excellent. Thanks, Jay. Pragati, would you like to go to the next question?
Yeah, I think everyone needs answer to this. When can we get our hands on this?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I cannot say for Christmas. Yeah, exactly. I knew this was coming. I saw it happening. No, it's not. Christmas is too early. But hold on a little bit longer. March 2024, so not 2025, 26 or whatever. March 2024, which is, take it, leave it like about 3 months from now, you will have this.
Okay.
So,
excellent.
Yeah, that's my promise.
Fantastic. That's great. That's great news. In terms of another question coming in so this one's from Santosh. Given the dynamic nature of data analysis, how does Power BI support real-time updates in visual calculations and its effect on performance?
So, I mean, these calculations are calculated on the aggregated data, right? So whenever the data updates, the visual calcs will be recalculated. And that's the same as what happens for measures today, right? A measure will be recalculated the moment data gets updated, because the result is not stored. It's just executed on query time. So whenever the underlying data is refreshed, the measure gets refreshed. Same for visual calc. However, the performance hit you're getting from measure refresh is way bigger because it's on the low level, the unaggregated data. Here, it's minimal. Like, we've seen 500% increases in performance. So the hit on performance is almost negligible for a visual calc compared to a measure. So really the answer is, well, we support it and it doesn't affect performance, at least so far in our tests, which include many hundreds of millions of rows in data sets.
Excellent. Thanks, Jay.
Yep.
I think we can take
would you like to go for
two
the
more
next one?
questions, I guess. Yeah, definitely. So the another question is coming from Jeroen. Like, I applaud the efforts to make DAX easier, but have you considered other obstacles to use or adapt DAX, such as a visual debugger, which, for instance, allows you to inspect intermediary values?
We absolutely thought about this. We absolutely explored this option. Honestly, the DAX query view is kind of already the answer there to allow you to do that. It's at least a starting point. Also, there's loads of external tools that does that, which is not an excuse. But for us, it was less of a priority. So we started on the other side and say, before we try to treat the symptoms, let's cure the disease, right? Because we can slap on a visual debugger. Yes, but what we would do is we would give you ways to understand something that's complicated. Instead, with this, we're saying it shouldn't be complicated. Let's start there. Right? So instead of giving you more tools to understand something complicated, we're now saying, let's not make it so complicated. So you don't need those tools to understand it, right? So I'm not saying we won't ever build a visual debugger. I'm just saying that's a treating of the symptoms of the actual problem. The actual problem is what we're tackling here. It is very complicated. So I think we made the right choice. Solving the problem? Yes, of course you should do a visual debugger. Yes, of course there should be a better debugging experience for all of us in Power BI. I absolutely agree. However, that would be treating the symptoms of the disease, and we want to tackle the disease first. So that's why we picked this one first. But we absolutely
agree. Fully agree on that approach. It's really good. And one thing that always comes to mind for me, Jay, is it's not really the tackling at the beginning, but more so for users that are trying to work with DAX in Power BI. So anybody familiar with PowerPoint will know that there's a coach and a trainer that guides you through your presentation that you should use. I do recommend it. That type of functionality for DAX would be amazing in Power BI, especially with introductions of co-pilots, etc.
Yeah. So guess what? The kind of conversation that we're having today to kind of like see if we can do something there. Yeah.
Excellent. We're getting lots of
ingredients to make that all happen eventually.
Excellent. We're getting lots of firsts here, so make sure you're taking note, everybody, to all of these little tidbits of information.
I'm not promising anything. I'm just telling you the conversation has happened.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and move forward with the last question. This is probably the best one. So from Russell, will this make building a star schema more imperative, i.e. will this work just as well with large flat files or flat tables like many business users make when building out reports?
So yeah, great question, Russell. In fact, this may sound weird, but if anything, Visual Calcs reduce the need for a proper data model. Because this will work with a flat file, flat table, which is not a data model, just as well as a properly designed dimensional model or a star schema, right? It will work with that because it has no notion of a data model. Like if you were able to create the visual you were looking for with the data in whatever shape or form you put that in, if you were able to wrestle into a visual form that you were happy with and now go like, there is something missing, but I have all the pieces here. I just want to extend this. You can do it with Visual Calc. At that point, it doesn't matter if that was a beautiful designed star schema as it should be, or a big ugly flat table. At that point, it doesn't matter because this thing is agnostic to that. It's basically, as once you have it in the visual, you're happy with that. I don't care how it came there. You typed it yourself. You asked 100 million people to type it in. I don't care. You build a beautiful star schema. Great. But it's kind of irrelevant at this point, right? You just look at the visual and you do it on there. So once you're happy with what's on the visual, can you extend? Can you build your calculation with the ingredients that you're showing on the visual? The answer to the question is yes. Then you can use Visual Calcs.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jay. And then I will show this comment because it's always going to be the case. No matter how hard the team works there, we're always going to want things a little bit sooner.
Of course, and honestly, I'm glad that you are also like wanting to have this sooner. I mean, I much rather have people like jumping at the bit than they not care, right? So I much rather have people saying like, why can I not have this sooner? You will have it soon. I mean, we've been at this for 3 years, so 3 more months is soon for me, I mean, from my perspective, right? But I much rather have this reaction than somebody saying, oh yeah, just ship it whenever it's ready, right? I mean, much rather have people excited for it. So thank you, whoever you are, anonymous LinkedIn user.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jay. That's all of the questions for today, but I think I can echo everyone's comments that we're all waiting with bated breath. It's such a huge leap forward. And I think that if I look back at all the hard work that yourself and your team and the rest of the teams within Microsoft are doing, it's like being a child in a sweet shop. Everything's coming to fruition. We've got lots of money and we can buy anything we want within the sweet shop. So that's the feeling at the moment. It's absolutely great work.
Hey, thank you very much for those kind words. And I also want to say we're only getting started, because if you look back at the introduction of the session, I promised you a couple of things that I haven't shown you yet. Like point and click. I did an awful lot of typing. So what I showed you is just about halfway through everything that we got planned. We have way more stuff coming from this feature. That will also not be available there in March. March is public preview. I didn't mention that. So that's not GA. That basically says this is the first time you can play with it. Give us your feedback. Help us build the right product. There's loads of stuff that we still want to build, loads of choices that we also need your feedback from you to give us that input to make the right choice. And then GA will follow after, depending on how quickly we iterate over that and how many bugs and issues you find. And how many of you agree with the choices that we made, right? So I just want to call that one out. We're not done at all. This is like page 50 out of 110 that we wrote in what has been called the Holy Book of Visual Calcs, which is the functional spec that I wrote, which is 110 pages long. We're now at page 50. That was what I was showing you today. So there's more stuff in the pipeline, just about like double the amount that we have now. So we're not done by a long shot. Just wanted to call that out.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure, Jay. I think when this especially comes for the public preview next year, I think every one of us is excited about. I'm sure you'll get like ton of things on the ideas forum on Fabric community, which you guys can then start looking at maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely, we will. And there will be a special community page that will open, and that's where I'll just spend all my days just answering all questions and capturing all the feedback. And of course, social media will help. And I hope that loads of people will try this out and give us feedback. The things you like, the things you think should have been better, the things that we missed, the things you hate, all of those things. Not only just tell us how great we are, whatever. Our moms tell us that, right? That's not what we want to hear from you only. Of course, it's nice to hear that every once in a while, but really where the real goal is for me is the stuff that we missed, or how this doesn't work in your scenario, right? Or the stuff that's just plain old bad. That's really where the goal is for me. So please give us balanced feedback, not only say how great we are, right? I know, that's fine. It's great. We love to hear that. All of us love to hear it. But really, I also want to learn where this thing is not the right fit for you.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I agree, because we all are here to improve the product. So yeah, it's always good to have both kind of feedback that in the end improves the product in the right direction.
Yeah, don't burn us down, please. But, also give us something to work on.
Agreed. And Jay, please do come back and share with us as well. So as some of these developments start to come to fruition, we would love to have you back to share that with us as well.
Of course, welcome. Happy to. It's also always nice to chat to you, and you make it so easy to do this kind of thing. So hats off to you both for hosting this and getting the community together this way. Really appreciate it. So yeah, happy to come back whenever I have news to share. But in the meantime, stay tuned for March, and it will just magically appear in the blog. You turn it on and off you go.
Excellent. Thanks, Jay. Pragati, let's go ahead and close the session. Jay, like I say, thank you very much once again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, as well, as part of the Microsoft Fabric UK user group, for joining us for what's been another riveting session. Please do join us next week, Thursday, where we are back, myself and Pragati, and we're also bringing 4 other MVPs, data platform MVPs, to come and have a roundtable, a table talk to wrap up 2023. I promise you, it's a session not to be missed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, don't miss it, guys, because we will look forward to all the comments that you guys will be putting, because what really was eye-catching thing that came for you this year. So we'll be talking about some of the great announcements that came this year. So please don't miss that even next week.
Excellent. And thank you, everyone. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you've been here with us at the Microsoft Fabric UK user group.